Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 26th of October 2023. And as ever at the moment, this second video, there's so much content to get through in terms of military aid and aspects thereof and geopolitical stuff. Every day seems to be packed, so I will rush through this. We'll start with the US announcing today or yesterday a new package of military aid to Ukraine to the amount of $150 million. They are actually in the lowest couple of months, or a couple of months of the lowest provision of aid since the beginning of the war. There's a real low point, and that might have a lot to do with the House of Representatives not having a majority speaker, so nothing has passed. But it's also, I think, to do with the Israeli conflict and political pushback within the US. So I think there's a whole mix of things. This, I don't know whether this has any issues with being passed through, where this has kind of come from. I think this is general ammunition, just keeping that flow going. There's no big ticket items here. The new US package may include additional GIMLRS, missiles for HIMARS, ammunition for NASAMS, so surface-to-air missile system, TOW, AIM-9 sidewinders, 155mm shells, that kind of stuff. But as Ukraine battle map here says, they just keep getting smaller. The Biden administration still has $5 billion that they could allocate in military aid to Ukraine. At this rate, they could keep sending military aid for another 2 years. So they could definitely send a lot more now. Also, Congress needs to approve more aid. They still have money that they've allocated to Ukraine that hasn't been spent. There are people clamoring for a lot more aid, but it's just a political hot potato to some degree in the US. Now, we will return to that due to movements in the House of Representatives in the geopolitical segment. So let's continue on military aid. Ukrainian pilots began flight training on the F-16 in Arizona. Come on, prepositions. US Air Force has announced this is really good. It looks like they are, I don't know if they're definitely expediting this training process, but it seems to be running along just fine now. Now it's all happening, and getting those pilots into those airframes is obviously super important and is that kind of key stage to the training. So hopefully that works fairly quickly. I'm sure I read this morning from somewhere else that could be a couple of months worth of training. Well, that would look like maybe being ready early spring, sorry. So that would be excellent for the Ukrainians, but I don't know that is definitely the case. And of course, it's not just about the pilots, it's about training of the maintenance staff and getting logistics changed in place, so on and so forth. Okay, deputies of the European Parliament will demand that EU countries hand over confiscated military equipment to Kiev, according to Politico MEPs. So those are members of the European Parliament. Want to find practical use for 146 armoured vehicles seized last year during 2 operations by the EU naval mission IRINI as part of efforts to enforce UN arms embargo on Libya. Brilliant. Get them going. And what you can do, sit on those 146 vehicles. What they're just going to be rusting. Put them to use. Come on. Go. Yep. Good stuff. EU is falling behind on its plans to provide Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells by March, according to Bloomberg. This is getting a lot of traction today. I'm going to call a part of it into question, though. Just doing a bit of, hopefully, common sense thinking. It is noted that more than half of the planned period has already passed. So you got a year, 6 months has passed, and they've only fulfilled 30%, and there is a risk of not achieving its goal. So yes, let's definitely kind of do a bit of scaremongering to make sure that those providers do get into gear and ramp up their shell production. However, if you're ramping up production so that each subsequent month you're going to get greater and greater production, your production is going to go, not necessarily exponentially, but each month you'll provide more and more artillery. So 30% by half the year, I would argue, might still be on track for delivering 100% by the end of the year. It's not that each month has equal amounts of shell production. That's not the point. They're ramping up. Each successive month has more shell production. So 30% at half the year would still plausibly be on track for 100% by the end of the year. So that's my mathematical interpretation. But lots of people are kind of going, oh no, oh my goodness, they're not going to produce it. But I'm not so sure. Hopefully they are still on track. Ukraine's ammo production, so Ukraine itself with its indigenous production surges, but still lags behind consumption. Well, absolutely. They're never going to be able to produce their own consumption rates worth of shells themselves. All right, they will absolutely have to rely on the international community. But this is really great. They have surged, they are producing more, and it helps with their sustainability going forward. Right. Ukraine's defense industry has grown its production of shells, but still cannot meet the demand and requires Western assistance, according to Ukraine's Minister for Strategic Industries. That's Kamshin, the guy from the railways originally. I don't think that's any surprise, but it's good that they have ramped it up impressively. Ukraine seeks to ramp up, everyone loves a bit of ramping up today, drone production to tens of thousands per month by year's end to strengthen defense capabilities, says Ukraine's Strategic Industries Minister. He's busy, isn't he? So I think this is good. So Russia are ramping up production of drones and things like the Shahed 131 and 136s and other ones like the Atalmas that I was reporting on yesterday. So they are ramping up their production capacities and widening their capabilities in drones, I think, as well. So the advantage Ukraine can get is one of scale. If they can outproduce Russia considerably, then that will be huge. And there was a lot of talk over the last year, really, of the Russians having a real problem. And this was actually the same for the Ukrainians until they changed their laws and processes. But there are many kinds of red tape in the Russian industry with regards to producing drones, and that was really frustrating for the Russians. Well, hopefully that's still in place, because it for the pro-Ukrainians, we'd like to see them outstrip the Russians by orders of magnitude in terms of drone production, because these are becoming the the nuts and bolts of offensive and defensive, reconnaissance, offensive and defensive military moves, reconnaissance, spotting, intelligence, surveillance. Drones are super important, as I keep saying. So, hopefully the Ukrainians can produce a lot. Australia has placed a plane in Germany that is supposed to protect the flow of aid to Ukraine. This was stated in a joint statement by US President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese after a meeting in Washington. The plane is said to be starting service this week. There has been a few announcements from Australia over the last couple of days, probably due to this big meeting in the US. I believe the US has kind of laid out the red carpet for Albanese there. So I think they're looking at really solidifying that relationship between Australia and the US. And you can throw the UK into that. There's something called AUKUS, AUKUS, which is Australia, UK, US, getting together to, not only is they involved in the Five Eyes intelligence initiative, where you've got another couple of countries as well. Is it New Zealand thrown in on that one, and Canada? But they are... I have to look into that. But there's also a project, really, or a move to get all these defence projects up and running between those three nations, Australia, UK, and US, in terms of building things like submarines together as three nations to solidify those relationships. So it's really important. Australia is a really important component there, and it's good to see them starting to give a little bit more here. There was a few Aussies on my thread yesterday saying, I'm really pissed off with Australia not doing enough. They could be doing more. There was talk about the F-18 Hornets that they had 40 odd of them, sitting around now effectively obsolete, that could be really well used in Ukraine, but nothing really came of that. Right. Russian manufacturers of Kinzhals and Iskanders bypass sanctions and receive components from Europe, according to the Insider. For the production of rockets, the corporation receives American microcircuits thanks to the Moscow-based ETS Electronics LLC, which imports microcircuits through a Chinese company. Companies from Poland, Germany, Lithuania, Latvia, Great Britain, and others were also used in supplies for the Russian missile manufacturer. It's so frustrating, this, isn't it? Faster than the speed of sanctions, Russian missile maker outmaneuvers Western export controls. So this needs to change. Here's a little dip into the Insider video.
Создан этот внушающий страх недосягаемый ракетный комплекс в подмосковной Коломне.
Both weapons are manufactured here at the MKB Design Bureau, just outside Moscow. It's owned by Rostec, a sprawling weapons conglomerate that's been subject to US and EU sanctions since 2014. Insider investigative journalist Sergei Yezhov has uncovered a network of Western technology firms and Russian intermediary companies that have helped MKB secure the machine tools and electronics it's needed to ramp up its production of missiles for the war in Ukraine. And so far, the authorities in the US and the EU have done nothing to impose sanctions against them. Take these Japanese SPEC testing chambers seen in an MKB promotional video. They're used to expose missile components to extreme temperatures and were shipped by a company in Poland called Intertrans a month after the full-scale invasion commenced last year. Customs records show Sandvik drills were imported straight from Berlin in January of this year. Machine tools used to manufacture parts on site come from Germany's KEB, and multiple American Haas machine tools are also visible on KBM's factory floor in its own promotional videos. The Kinzhal's targeting system is made by another Rostec-owned company that got the microchips it needs from a German firm called Advantech GmbH as recently as March of last year. The Kinzhal supply chain truly spans the whole of the Western Alliance. One major Rostec supplier is ETS Electronics. It sourced microchips from well-known American firms like Texas Instruments and Analog Devices, both used in the Iskander, through a Chinese intermediary called ETS Electronics Ltd. Earlier this year. ETS doesn't try very hard to mask its links to Rostec. It was created by a low-level employee of the defense conglomerate named Yekaterina Kulakovskaya, seen here, explaining how the company gets around sanctions. ETS has so far avoided being added to EU sanctions, despite its appearance at Russia's Army 2022 conference. It was also awarded a certificate by the Russian defense minister himself. Ukrainian investigators routinely collect down missiles to identify.
So it goes on to talk about how they collect information on what components are used. But really interesting video this, and it's really frustrating that companies are still able to operate and sell really vital components in the manufacture of these horrific weapons to Russia. They're still able to do that, and there are loopholes or flouting of these laws. It's just really annoying. Anyway, Russia says it has practiced a large-scale nuclear strike. Russia has allegedly successfully tested large-scale retaliatory nuclear strikes using ground, sea, and air components of the country's nuclear forces, according to the Kremlin's press service. This is definitely a bit of saber rattling going on here. Tests included a Yars intercontinental ballistic missile launched from a cosmodrome in the Arkhangelsk Oblast, a Sineva ballistic missile launched from a nuclear submarine in the Barents Sea, and Tu-95 MS bombers launching cruise missiles, Moscow has claimed. In fact, there is a video of the RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missile in the sky over the Arkhangelsk Oblast of Russia following its launch yesterday from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome within the framework of the ongoing exercise of the Russian strategic forces. That is something of a worry, I guess, but it could also just be trying to announce to the world that, hey, we've got stuff. Rostec have delivered, so going back to Rostec, who were involved or who manufacture those missiles, have delivered the first batch of Malva SPHs, or self-propelled howitzers, self-propelled guns, to the Russian army. These are, well, your classic self-propelled guns, look like a pretty big piece of kit. I don't know too many details concerning this gun, but they are still making stuff. So again, this goes back to questions about sanctions, about their effectiveness and how many loopholes there are. This has come from RA Novosti. The Russian military received the first batch of Malva self-propelled howitzers, although I don't think it talks about how many in the batch. So this is a modern powerful weapon which is possible to destroy almost any object with high explosive fragmentation shells at a distance of more than 24 kilometers. So the range isn't huge, to be honest. It's an 8x8 wheel chassis arrangement. The gun is mounted. The gun mount is able to travel 1,100 kilometers on public roads without refueling. And it overcomes off-road well with all-wheel drive and a powerful diesel engine, they say. Ammunition capacity is up to 30 rounds. The rate of fire of the howitzer is more than 7 rounds per minute, which is fairly impressive if that is true. So self-propelled gun, it'll be frustrating if you start seeing those get to the front line. But we've heard similar things like this before, seen similar things like this before, and you're never quite sure of how many they can produce. We've heard about this with the multiple launch rocket system that's supposed to be better than HIMARS, but we don't see too many of them. Right, as per UK intelligence, North Korean munitions have reached Russian depots, potentially making North Korea a significant arms supplier to Russia, supporting their military operations in Ukraine. Some people have done estimations of how much they can import from North Korea. It was on Ukraine, the latest podcast, a couple of days ago. Yesterday, was it? A couple of days ago, actually. And it is a bit of a worry, obviously, but it is also indicative of the fact that Russia are desperate for ammunition. So it's not just Ukraine in that boat. Now, this has also caused condemnation from South Korea, the US, and Japan for the alleged shipment of North Korean ammunition. Now, this is significant because, as I mentioned before, if South Korea are now under no illusion that North Korea are providing ammunition to Ukraine, then that opens the floodgates for South Korea, perhaps even Japan, to get on board and more overtly support Ukraine directly. So at the moment, South Korea doesn't give any equipment directly to Ukraine, although the AHS Crab, which Poland are giving to Ukraine, is a joint venture between South Korea and Poland. And so it does seem to be a bit of a loophole there. But what we have seen is South Korea provide ammunition to the US, for example, and the US provide their ammunition to Ukraine. So it's functionally the same. However, it would be more efficient if South Korea could just straight up provide Ukraine with a bunch of stuff, including not just ammunition, but maybe kit as well. So the fact that they are condemning North Korea for doing that, I think is excellent news for Ukraine, given that Ukraine would like an answer to the North Korean issue there. A Ukraine resistance group claims occupiers in Luhansk are forcing miners to join the war. Atesh is a group we're hearing quite a lot about at the moment, a partisan group, quite active in Crimea, I believe. Says agents in Rovenki, Krasny Luch and Krasnodon confirmed miners have received summonses. Why this is significant is because Russia has previously said miners were protected, but now they must fight against their own country. Of course, this is people fighting in occupied territories, being drawn from the populace in the Donbass to fight against Ukraine, to fight against their own country, which is, I guess, fine if you are a militia fighter anyway, voluntarily so. But if you're being forced to do that and your sentiments lie not with Russia, then that could present quite a bit of cognitive dissonance in the fighters. But also, it might mean that they might not do as instructed quite so willingly. I don't know. Interesting dynamic. Right, now we're getting on to geopolitical stuff. This is super important because it concerns the US House of Representatives in the Congress, but it concerns Ukraine assistance from the US, which has been effectively put on hold. Right, Mike Johnson. So finally, after all these weeks, there is now an elected speaker. I have a feeling there's an elected speaker because I think you had to be there to vote, and I guess not everyone was there, but every Republican did vote for him. Whereas, people weren't voting for other Republicans from the Republican Party. So, there's interesting dynamic here. Mike Johnson is an ally of Donald Trump. So he's been elected as the US Speaker of the House of Representatives. All Republicans that were present voted for him. Now, he's an ally of Trump. He defended Trump during the impeachment hearings. In fact, he was supposedly an architect for the January the 6th insurrection. So that shows where he sits. And he voted against a $40 billion aid package to Ukraine previously, voted against additional allocations to Ukraine for 2022 and aid in 2023. This is not good news for Ukraine. The votes are there, 220 Republicans and 208 Democrats there voted, but he got through. As Kyiv Independent says, a Trump ally, Ukraine skeptic, Republican Congressman Mike Johnson has been elected there after the ousting of McCarthy. Now, the Times now reports here that on how he sits with both Israel and Ukraine. With regard to Ukraine, he's quoted, "I know we see things from different points of view." This is Johnson saying after he got the vote, "but I know in your heart you want to do what's right," he said, looking at Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democrats, minority leader. So we'll find common ground there. Well, I hope so. Several Democratic lawmakers are now concerned about Biden's $106 billion bill passing the House now that this guy's in charge. Legislation majorly includes funding for Ukraine, Israel, and US borders. So, quote from Johnson on Twitter, "We should impose debilitating sanctions on Russia's economic interests. We should return to robust American energy production to provide greater stability and security here and for our European allies. And we should exclude Russia from global commerce and international institutions. Even though the best time to take these actions has passed, we must act decisively." He had posted that before. He said, "America's prayers remain with the Ukrainian people." Yeah, I mean, it depends what your opinion on prayers are, but my opinion is that ain't as good as sending a whole bunch of ammunition and equipment. Prayers don't win wars. Sorry for those who theologically are in a different position to me. It's like when someone's gunned down a whole bunch of people in Maine in the last 24 hours. Absolutely horrific. And it's like, we offer prayers. No, that's not good enough, guys. It's not good enough. We need action. Things need to happen. Prayers aren't good enough. He also voted for Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022, which became a law eventually. However, he is skeptical of it now. Quote, "American taxpayers have sent over $100 billion in aid to Ukraine in the last year." Of course, you've got to, don't get me started on how you count that money up. It's not, I suppose all money is taxpayer money in some sense, but it's not taken from here to there. There's this investment, this is strategic gains, which will benefit the taxpayer. Anyway, Johnson said in a Twitter post, "They deserve to know if the Ukrainian government is being entirely forthcoming and transparent about the use of this massive sum of taxpayer resources." I guess I don't disagree with that sentiment, but I just hope that he comes to his senses on Ukraine now that he's in that important position. Right, Hungarian Prime Minister, talking about Trump, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has bragged about his new cap that Donald Trump mailed him. Earlier, Trump called Orban one of the world's strongest politicians and a Turkish leader. I reported on this yesterday. Of course, Trump probably mixing up stuff there to call him the leader of Turkey. Orban pretty happy with that signed cap. I guess that shows who Orban is and kind of where Trump's sentiments lie, really. I am not a fan of Orban. Hungarian parliament rejects proposal to vote on Sweden's NATO bid. So this is just... All right, I don't want to get on an anti-Trump rant here, but if you're going to if you're going to schmooze with some bloke that is freaking putting a spanner in the works of NATO and international global bloody security, then you're being a douche. I really want to swear. Like, Trump, you are backing the wrong horse here, mate. This is not good. It's for me, like, when Trump was in charge, and of course I was a massive critic of Trump, but one of the worst elements of Trump was his foreign policy. Like, he is not a foreign policy guy. Everything's transactional, and that doesn't work with foreign politics, where you're having to work with allies, and it's not about being in competition with allies. It's about working with allies and trying to get the best results internationally. And he just looks at strongmen and tries to appease strongmen, whether it be Orban or Kim Jong-un or Putin even. So, yeah, and we've got now Hungary screwing over Sweden's accession to NATO, which then is about, JAS-39 Gripens to Ukraine. It's about, it's all connected, and it's so bloody frustrating. Hungarian foreign minister said no change to Hungary's position on Sweden's NATO accession. Turkey's submission of a measure to approve Sweden's NATO accession does not affect Hungary's decision-making process. Hungarian foreign minister Peter Szijjártó said on the 24th, and he was recently in Moscow meeting Putin, so... Well, so was Orban, wasn't he? So, I don't know if he met Putin, but he's in Moscow, and then Orban met Putin in China. Anyway, Hungary's foreign minister, the guy we were just talking about, met with the illegitimate president of Belarus today, with Lukashenko telling him, quote, the EU could help end the war in Ukraine if it wished. We are just... The problem... Okay. It's probably less of a problem if Hungary was somehow kicked out of the EU. The problem is NATO. Like, if you kick Hungary out of NATO, Hungary now have access to NATO intelligence. NATO must be really wary of people like Hungary now they're under Orban, with what they're sharing, what Hungary is sharing with Russia. You kick Hungary out of NATO, there's probably some serious repercussions there. I was thinking about this in bed last night because that's how cool I am. And I just think that puts NATO in a real bind, because they would love to, I'm sure, have some stiff words with Hungary. But the further you push Hungary away, the more they can compromise NATO to Russia. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Anyway, he's in Minsk to take part in the Eurasian Security Conference taking place today and tomorrow. I mean, bloody hell, whose side are you on here? Like, you're in these two groups that are evidently majorly aligned against Russia, and in both of those groups you are the main person, the main entity who is not aligned with the group, and you are going out on a limb to align yourself with Russia, and that is a problem. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is interesting, a right-wing leader who's very different here to Orban, emphasised the importance of continuing to support Ukraine in the war started by Russia. Quote, we should not make the mistake of reducing support for the Ukrainian cause, she said. According to Meloni, Italy looks, quote, not only at the present but also at the peaceful European future of Ukraine. Excellent, Meloni. What are you doing, Orban? And Szijjártó, what are you doing, Orban? Ukraine's GDP grows by 9% since last September. Ukraine's GDP grew by 9.1% year on year, according to the Economy Ministry's preliminary estimates, which is great. There were claims it was going to grow 4.7%, but actually 9% is even better, obviously. However, it's going from a contraction year of, I forget what it was, 27%, I don't know, some huge contraction. So the growth needs to be understood in that context. This is like yeah, you might post record growth, but on the back of record losses type thing, that record growth is somewhat mitigated. While the war is ongoing, economic growth is proof of the, quote, high ability of businesses to adapt to new challenges, as well as assistance from the state and international partners. Absolutely. Moving on, Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan does not see any advantages in the presence of Russian military bases in Armenia. Yerevan that's the capital of Armenia, is looking for new partners because Russia has failed to fulfill its allied obligations, Pashinyan said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. This is very interesting. So this is on the back of French soldiers being sent to Armenia. France has been a really strong supporter of Armenia here. They are strategically very much involved with the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, but on the Armenian side. Anyway, the move away from Russia continues here with the declaration that, hey, we don't want Russian military bases. We're happy to have other Western military bases there. Interesting. G7 countries plan to announce a ban on the imports of Russian diamonds by the end of October. That's according to Reuters, but widely reported. That's good news there. Here we have Putin meeting representatives of different Russian religions in the Kremlin. His position at the table says a lot. Wow. I mean, what's wrong with him? Is this still one of these health things? Or does he worry that anyone could just stand up and try and murder him? So this is a kind of safety thing? I don't know. That is Putin for you. He's a real one for the lads there. Get together. Yeah, let's hang out together. I'd like to give you a hug. No, I don't. I'd like to sit 50 meters away from you, thanks. Very personable chap. Right, this is Shashank Joshi from The Economist talking about the sabotage of both the Baltic connector gas pipeline from Estonia to Finland and the cables that have been affected. And Shashank Joshi was saying, well, this is kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting this. A Chinese vessel. Okay, that's a bit different. But then, as I reported yesterday, so as expected, the ownership chain is murky. As I understand, although the ship is registered with Xinjiang Shipping in China, that is owned and operated as part of Torgmol, Russia. Only website working, Torgmol.ru has been taken down, so the .com is working. Now, this then makes a lot more sense of sabotage taking place. And Shashank Joshi says, I'm a little less baffled today than earlier in the week. Sources say New Polar Bear, so that's a ship that's being investigated, has ownership links to Russia. Its crew entirely changed over on its Kaliningrad stop, and it was close to Russian vessels when AIS was turned off or manipulated around cable pipeline sites. In other words, this is majorly dodgy, and the connections to Russia are very overt. And on ownership links to Russia, Eric Kanika has looked at some of this through open sources, and there is evidence that he looks into, tried to map the web of parties involved around the new Polar Bear. A lot of weirdness going on. Torgmol, Russia, new good stuff, OOO, and In Touch Logistics all share a single phone number and all deal with transport to and from China, but obviously with Russian connections there. But I won't go into that thread. We'll continue with Joshi. On the AIS proximity point, one theory is that new Polar Bear may have been providing some sort of cover for the other vessels nearby. A new Polar Bear's Kaliningrad stop was October the 3rd, days before the damage to the pipeline and cables. I don't think the detail about the complete crew changeover has been reported before, but happy to be corrected. This is huge. So if China is implicated with Russia in doing this, I mean, this might open up a whole new can of worms. But unfortunately, I should have probably done this on the back of talking about Hungary here. Russia's new puppet in the EU, Robert Fico, has dealt another blow to EU unity. This is a real worry for the EU. It's a real worry for global security. It's a worry for Ukraine. Slovakia's new prime minister told the EU it must turn from a supplier of weapons to Ukraine into a peacemaker. Fico confirmed he would not vote for new Russia sanctions if they harm Slovakia. And I believe he's nominated his prime minister as well in the coalition. He's in coalition as a kind of centre-left party in coalition with a far-right party, just because they align on like populism. I think they align on immigration and a few other points. But it's just a really odd coalition there. And it makes you wonder really what the ideology is underwriting Fico and his party. But yeah, certainly not good news for Ukraine. So an interesting mix of news today. I hope the Congress situation sorts itself out, and I really hope the new speaker for the GOP aligns himself with Ukraine. I really do. It's so important. It really is. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much to the members of my channel. You guys are legends, one and all. And a few thanks, just really explicit thanks. Thank you very much to SRUS54. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Also, Torgeir Jensen, David McQuiggin, Peter Kluken, Mark Bizque, again, legend, Mitch Mazarol, always, Angelo Vecchio, and so many more. Really, really do appreciate you. You guys allow me to do what I do. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to just include Axel Grammersdorf and Peter Smith in that as well. So thanks so much. Anyway, take care. All the very best. Toodle pips.